Hello, everyone. Journey Writers is happy to be at the True Colors Conference another year, this time to discuss queer Black culture from the perspective of writers. Journey Writers has existed since 2013 for the purpose of offering a safe and affirming space for writers to share their works and get support and critique. Some of you may know us from our annual Black History Month program, Queer Black History. Journey Writers tell the whole story. We've performed this for the last 3 years and look forward to you joining us in 2021. I'd like to introduce the panelists for this discussion. We have with us today Andre Kitt, Beth Gibbs, LaShawn Henderson Middleton, and due to technical difficulties, we have Leslie Bivens, audio only, but believe me, she's just lovely. I want to thank Larry Reming, one of our board members, for his technical assistance. Though you won't see or hear Larry, we could not be doing this without his talented contribution. We're of the belief that Black culture has informed queer Black culture, and that queer Black culture has indeed informed Black culture and the dominant culture as well. So for example, when I look at the balls that originated in Harlem in the 1920s and that are portrayed and live on today in shows such as Pose, I see church. I see the Pentecostal churches that my mother took me to visit. Though we weren't members, my mother was so social, she went to everybody's church. I see it in the the go-ons, the tambourines, the fans. I see church. I don't know what you may see, but I see it in the struts and the shouts and the bold attire. A clear example of queer Black cultures informing or affecting the dominant culture would be RuPaul's Drag Race. For sure, everybody's eating it up, or shows where drag queens are helping straight women to be their best. Well, that's interesting, and it goes more than that. Would any of you like to give any comments about the way you think the cultures have affected one another back and forth before we move into talking about writers?
So I would probably take the first pass at it because, like you, I do see church. And if we're going to talk about how queer history or queer culture informs or affects a Black culture, I see it being informed and affected by the church. But I also see that it's emulating things, ceremony, if you will, procedures, even some of the dialogue that happens at church, the language. But it goes all the way back to where church became very important for the Black community and where church came into being for enslaved people. It was brought in, as we know, to calm down and influence the behavior of enslaved people. And it was the first place where, enslaved people felt autonomy on the slave plantation. They could hold position, they could be somebody, they could flourish and wear as fancier clothes as they possibly could, but there was ceremony. And they stand on that ceremony. And as we know, we're still paying the price and the cost of slavery today. Thus, we're still having to witness the byproduct of slavery as it was related to church, and now as church is influencing modern day Black culture. And we know that the LGBT community, we are trendsetters, and a lot of what we do impacts the culture. So it's a boomerang effect. It's going around and around in kind of a circle. So yeah, I see church, I see ceremony, I see assimilation to I don't know, I guess a religion or an institution that was forced upon us. And even a lot of what we see today in regards to emulating what happens in a heterosexual versus homosexual relationships. We try to emulate what's going on in popular society. So yeah, you see that in the ballroom society, and you see that in our culture today.
And
Yeah,
I have a
thank you.
different way of looking at that because, you know, there's been a really significant growth in the amount of conversation that's gone around about self-awareness and mental health. And there's also this idea that in the Black community in general, there's a stigma about really going to take care of your mental health. And
Mm.
one of the reasons that I really tuned into and became a fan of RuPaul's Drag Race is that he has evolved so that he brings that right into almost every single show that he does, because you see the drag queens having to deal with their own life story, their own difficulties, facing their pain, getting through their pain. And when they sit down one-on-one to have their little conversation with him before the final show, it's usually about how have you learned about yourself through this process? And he's also famous for saying, drag isn't who you are, it reveals who you are. So I think he's done a real service to the Black community in general, because more of us really need to be taking into consideration the mental health and our ability to understand ourselves, the way we think, our emotions. And I don't like the word control, but learning how to manage the difficulties that we've had to grow through and live through. And so I think in terms of at least the drag community, that's a real benefit that they are offering to the larger Black culture.
Thank you.
So
Anybody else?
may I chime in here? So to piggyback on what both Andre and Beth said, along the lines of RuPaul, his original show, Drag You, is very reminiscent of the show that True Colors puts on when they drag you away. And it's important because it teaches you to embrace a style and a way of being in a safe space where people are judging you not just on your outward appearance, but on your inner appearance, because you know that in a pageant scene, it doesn't matter how fly you are. If you don't feel fly, you won't win. So added to that, even a show like Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, you can see the queer influence on popular culture. It is a little bit stereotypical in that they take, you know, the certain incarnations of what they think a gay male is, you know, it's trim, stylish, uber fashionable. But what it does do is it takes someone that is in a hetero situation and it zhuzhes them up and it gives them the same confidence that's required to be on the drag scene. So in a sense, they are kind of in a reciprocating kind of relationship, and it's showing that how the two cultures do relate to one another and they need each other.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks. No, that's really valuable. Reciprocal is the word, and I think the important thing of the progress is, even though it's limited at this time, is the acknowledgement that yes, queer Blacks and queers have something to give.
Absolutely.
Of value in terms of influence.
And these shows that are coming on now is giving exposure to that fact. So it is reciprocal, but it's symbiotic as well.
Right.
Yes.
And I like that it's not being portrayed clownish.
Pardon, I didn't quite hear what you said. I want everybody to hear it.
I said I like that the recent portrayal of these manifestations of all these different relationships in a positive light, not in a clownish, satirical,
Thank you.
over the top, like real. It's real.
Right. That's great. That's great. Thank you.
And
yes,
I was just going to say that I see it as church as well. The call and response, and to piggyback on what Andre said, definitely the fashion. When you go to church, you bring your best. You're going to bring your best, to look your best. And that's one of the things that I see is the fashion and the call and response that goes back and forth between the MC and the audience, and getting them involved in the whole, scene.
Yes.
And if you're
Yes.
a young Black person or a Black person, period, you remember your Sunday go to meeting clothes.
Yes.
You remember your Sunday best. So it's all taking you right back to the church.
And in the church as well as the ball,
Mhm.
we are indeed possessed by the Spirit.
Definitely.
Move with the Spirit. Yes, indeed. Now
Well, I'll
let's
let you all have that because I don't want to remember my church going clothes. I hated them. Patent leather shoes, little white dress. No, thank you. My church is the Church of the Pines in the forest. That's where I go to get my spirit.
I was such a funny little young lesbian, little femme lesbian. I loved the crinoline slip, the wide dress, the patent leather pocketbook that matched the shoes with the lace things. But the thing is, I would be on the front porch waiting for my godfather to pick me up to go to Sunday school. And I would be unconsciously flirting with the older, famous Wanda the Bulldagger of our neighborhood, looking just like a little man, going, Wanda, do you like my dress? If they knew my mind in church, they would have drowned me in the baptismal. Pool.
For
It
me,
was
it was just
drowned.
any chance to be dressed up in any kind of outfit or costume, period. Because it's
Yes.
always
I was just having a ball. Anyway, let's talk about writers. Black queer writers, both those that were very out and proud, and those that were closeted, have really contributed a lot to the progression of thoughts and behaviors in social justice, in faith circles, and a lot of places, and moved on, I think, with some acceptance in the Black community. I'd like to ask each of you, who are some of the Black queer writers that have had an influence on you, and how do you think they've influenced the larger societies?
So I would say one of the people who's influenced me the most is James Baldwin. What I loved about him is that he did not hide the fact that he was gay, but that was not all of who he was. I love the fact that he could express that he had great friendships with a lot of the great Black leaders, such as Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And I love the fact that he speaks about his friendships with them because he shows that gay men and straight men can have friendships. And that they can be successful friendships where there is mutual respect of one another. And just the fact, just his writings, because they're so relevant to everything that we're going through today, his writing is still so relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So when I work with the kids, we always talk about connections, and we've talked about connections as journey writers before. So the connection here for me is Bayard Rustin, who I portray in our show, Journey Writers Tell the Whole story. Bayard Rustin was actually friends with the gentleman you just named.
Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King.
No, the first guy you mentioned.
Malcolm X.
No, the
James
first
Baldwin.
James Baldwin. Just gonna go down the whole list. James Baldwin. He was friends with him. They were contemporaries. So the connection is they were all friends. He happened to be a gay gentleman too that got pushed back into the back of the scenes. He was, he wasn't for he was for the civil rights cause, but they thought that he would be a detriment for that. But the connection is that they were friends, and one of the friends was just out and open, and the other friend was out, but he wasn't as open because the movement didn't want him to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman I portrayed, Pauli Murray, I had only known about her because my book group read a book about the friendship between Pauli Murray and Eleanor Roosevelt. And Polly she was a lot of things during her life, including an activist in the women's movement, the civil rights movement, a lawyer. She became an Episcopal priest. The woman was like amazing, incredibly smart, absolutely wonderful writer, but she was in the closet. And every time, and when I portrayed her through all those different evolutions that she went through, it was always, she was a behind the scenes, and she was ahead of the times, but behind the scenes. And the time that she lived in was probably a big part of that. If she were around today, and I think we all agree, she'd be out. But she was not out. She was closeted pretty much her whole life. And in terms of other writers, I mean, I've read Ellison, Lord, Baldwin, Walker, Giovanni, Hansberry, Hughes, Octavia Butler, my absolutely favorite science fiction writer, and a more modern writer, Roxane Gay. I don't know if you are aware of her or what she's written, but when I read them, I read them because of what they've written, and it seemed like I didn't know their sexual orientation when I started to read them. That became, it was sort of evolving knowledge as I went through. So in terms of what influenced me to include LGBTQ plus characters in my writing, both in fiction and nonfiction, was just this whole evolution of the culture. And I've always been an ally, so it was kind of easy to kind of tune into that. And so including them in my writing is simply because it's just a huge part of the culture. And if you're going to write honestly and truly and fully about the culture, then even if you're writing nonfiction or fiction, they need to be included.
So Beth took all the names that we were going to use.
Oh. I didn't talk about them. I just said I read them.
No, I'm joking.
For me, she's not really an author per se, but she did pen some essays, and she did a lot of activist work and some underground resistance work, which requires a lot of hidden manifestos and double agent and pageantry. And that's my girl, Josephine Baker.
Mhm.
And so many people didn't even realize that she was bi, you know, because she was just so over the top about her life. And to me, that is the key thing there. You can choose to either wear this hat or wear this hat or no hat at all and just do what you have to do and just be, you know, Susie Average. Or you can, by the other same token, you can be Marsha P. and be on 24/7. Now, Josephine was on 24/7, but she was so far behind the scenes. She worked at the underground French resistance. She did so much, you know, so much so that she was expelled from the country.
Mm-hmm.
So she definitely bears talking about in this conversation. And she spoke with her body. She wrote with her body.
Indeed, she did. Indeed, she did. I just love honoring our ancestors like this. And I want to make a comment about Pauli Murray. Pauli was so conflicted and confused. Pauli didn't understand herself / himself, you know, and said that, and really suffered with that, you know, saying like, I love where Pauli says that my aunt called me her little boy girl.
Right.
With today's awareness, Pauli would be out, and Pauli would identify as a transgender man. The main point I want to say is most people don't know about Pauli Murray, but if Pauli had been a man physically, right? If the body matched the gender presentation and identity, Pauli's name would be up front and center. Every Black history lesson you ever see, because Pauli's technical writing and research dismantled segregation in education.
Yep, you're right. Thank you for those details.
Right? Yet she wrote the pamphlets, and she literally wrote the over 700-page book that Thurgood Marshall called, what was it, the Bible?
The Bible.
Yes, and gave that to the NAACP to do the work. After having to try to discredit Pauli And after the Howard professor, well, I don't know why a woman would want to be in law school, changed history. So it's up to us. That's why I love Queer Black History, to uphold that. I want to say a little bit about the writers I love. Essex Hemphill, to me, is like the modern day James Baldwin. Could have been James Baldwin's grandson. And I love that because Essex Hemphill talks about manhood as a gay man, with just comfortable confidence, not in a defensive way, and addresses all Black men as brothers, gay, bi, straight, trans, and talks about what we need to be doing coming together. So I love that. And I think his work is so valuable. Audre Lorde meant so much to me personally, because to read something, it like makes you real, you know? It means I'm real, I'm validated, I'm affirmed, just in reading that. And then I love, finally, Michelle Cliff. I've read everything she's ever written. I love that perspective in that she not only writes as a whole person, and important pieces of that whole person are herself as a Jamaican lesbian, someone greatly influenced by colorism, classism, you know, all the things that are going on in society. And while dealing all of this, we all are still trying to find love. So I just, you know, really love holding them up. I think that we've talked about in some ways that writing has changed norms and has changed culture. And certainly that queer culture and life has had a great influence on the culture. I think we both change it and reflect it. Does that make sense to people?
Absolutely.
The writing itself, or what the subject of the writing? Is it the writing because the writer's gay, or is it because of is it gay writing? What do you
I think it's the writing
Writing.
that
I
people
think
do as queer Blacks. And like we said, it's not only just writing about being queer,
Right.
but it's writing, knowing who we are in full.
And it's
But I think it also talks, you know, it shows that the problems don't care whether you're gay, straight, lesbian, bi. We all have the same problems, and you see that in the writings that we're the same.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think when you're seen as other, it gives you a different perspective, a sort of a platform from which to observe the society and the culture that you live in, to be able to cast a light on the areas that have been pushed down and are underneath. So a lot of their writing just like a lot of writers of Black folks and of women who are feeling oppressed and not a part of the culture. So when we write to illuminate what the problems are and hopefully to move things forward. We've got 5 minutes left.
All right. I think showing how the problems are the same is one thing that helps build alliances, but they're the same, and then there are things that stand out. It's true. Human life and human problems are the same. For instance, you know, violence is there, but somebody might beat up a more masculine presenting woman for that reason, and beat up a feminine presenting woman for another reason. They're both suffering, but we have to deal with all that.
You know, Regina, I wanted to add that, you know, when I was coming up and I started to reading Nikki Giovanni, I got to give her credit, as I was saying before, that to help me start to write, because her writing was not about, her writing had to do with, a lot of times, with racial tensions, love, topics that wouldn't have said anything to me about her. I didn't know she was gay until I was, you know, a grown man. It was like, oh, okay. So we talked about this before. It wasn't necessarily that she was a gay writer. It was that her writing, as you said a moment ago, the depth of her writing just brought me into it.
Mm-hmm.
And Andre, sort of like what you said, as you said that, I just came to mind the scene in The Color Purple between Sugar Avery and Celie. When Sugar Avery teaches her how to touch herself, it wasn't even sexual. It was more about comfort and love. And I think the way that society and literature has evolved is teaching people it's okay to be more fluid and not to be so afraid in showing the fluidity in all your emotions.
Yes, yes, that's life. I know our time is winding down, so I'm going to ask us to think about final, comments that you'd like to make.
I just found that Ralph Ellison's Invisible Life was something that resonated with me because I believe that there are a lot of men who, have certain sexual urges, feelings, desires, and they don't feel like their community, the Black community, is embracing of that. So they want to go ahead and live on the outsides or the outskirts of that because we want to be accepted, and we want our work to show and our work to work out for us, but at the same time don't feel comfortable enough to come out and say that. So there's a lot of respect, and people who just came on out, James Baldwin and others who just lived their life out loud. There was bravery there.
Yes.
Well, my two favorite authors at the moment, I think I mentioned Octavia Butler because she wrote science fiction and I love science fiction. And Roxane Gay, I encourage you to look her up. She writes a lot of memoirs and essays, and she's just really right on. She does a lot of stuff on Twitter too, so she's easy to find. But the thing I liked about both of how they write, it just felt very modern and very contemporary, which is where my head is. So that's it. That worked a lot to influence how I write and how I include the characters I include in my writing. And I'll just conclude by sharing one of my favorite RuPaul quotes: "If you can't love yourself, how in the hell are you gonna love somebody else?"
Somebody else. Yes, indeed. And with that, I want to say I am so grateful to the people who support Queer Black History. Every year, someone else is asking us to come do it. It'd be great if in February, nobody had to work, nobody had to do nothing, whatever. We all have plenty of money because we could just tour in February throughout Connecticut. And, but to look at the diversity of the audience that supports us and to look at the number of people of color who come out and support us, warms my heart. It really tells me I have community.
In support from that community.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's just beautiful. I want to thank all the people who are watching this at the True Colors Conference and look forward to joining you again next year, either in person or virtually. And thank you, Journey Writers, who've been here with us. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Welcome.
Yes, do join us for Queer Black History 2021. Visit our website, please, or our Facebook page. And though we don't have the date and the place yet, Queer Black History, Journey Writers Telling the Whole Story will be happening in February 2021. Stay tuned for details. And thank you so much.